Our second scripture lesson for today comes from Luke chapter 20, verses 27 through 38. Some of the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus with a question. "Teacher," they said, "Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married a woman and died childless. The second and then the third married her. And in the same way, the 7 died, leaving no children. Finally, the woman died too. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her?" Jesus replied, "The people of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of taking part in the age to come and in the resurrection from the dead will neither marry nor be given in marriage. And they can no longer die, for they are like angels. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. But in the account of the burning bush, even Moses showed that the dead rise. For he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. For to him all are alive." Some of the teachers of the law responded, "Well said, teacher." And no one dared to ask him any more questions. Please pray with me. Dear God, may these words from your scripture go deep into our hearts and help us to draw closer to you. Amen. The Bible doesn't have a whole lot to say about what exactly happens to us after we die. I know I would love it if there were a whole book of the Bible with clear descriptions, testimonials, and even a full-color brochure with pictures. What we all really want is a map of heaven with directions to the houses of all of our loved ones and recommendations for the best divinely good restaurants and the eternally open and perfectly brewed coffee shops. We want a hoarder's travel guide to life after death. And I wouldn't say no to a particular directory as well. Instead, what we do have in the Bible are a few key scriptures about life after death. And our second reading today is one of them. In this passage, we find the Sadducees trying to stump Jesus with a question about heaven. But instead of Jesus answering them with another question, he does something unexpected. He answers their question. And the answer that he gives to the Sadducees gives us insight, not only into something about heaven, but it also gives us insight into the motivations of the Sadducees. You see, in the first century, the Sadducees were one of 3 different sects of Hebrew priestly people who all had different beliefs about the afterlife. There were the Pharisees, which we hear about a lot, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, who were monastic. The Sadducees were very harsh and strict in their adherence to the laws of the Torah. They did not believe in oral interpretations of the law either. They were very, very liberal in their theology. When the Torah said an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth in the laws of retribution after a crime, the Sadducees were the ones who argued that literally if someone lost a tooth in a fight, that the perpetrator's tooth should also be knocked out. The Sadducees also did not believe in an afterlife. This had big consequences as far as Israelite inheritance laws. Because they did not believe in life after death, the Sadducees did not believe that the line of inheritance should pass through someone who was deceased. as it does in the practice of levirate marriage. Some of the Sadducees' most bitter arguments with the Pharisees came about because of their different interpretations of inheritance law. So when this group of Sadducees come to question Jesus about levirate law, they ask him who could be married to this woman in heaven. They're not asking out of concern about this woman's feelings of love for her husband, or they're not even asking if we recognize other people once we die. No, what the Sadducees really wanted to know was if Jesus believed in the resurrection and who the woman would belong to. It was a disguised question about inheritance. It was a question about who had the rights to own another person, rights to her property, and the rights to the inheritance of all of these husbands. So in this conversation here in Luke, Jesus reveals a very interesting and important thing about heaven. Number one, there is no more ownership or a legal claim of anyone over anyone else. A woman would not be transferred from one brother to another like a hand-me-down. Instead, each person would belong only to God and to themselves. The human structures of property and people worrying about inheritance and the ownership of stuff seemingly do not apply in the heavenly realm. And the second question that Jesus answers by the Sadducees is not a question that they asked. Jesus directly challenges the Sadducees' belief that there is no afterlife. Jesus cunningly points out that when Moses asks who God is, God responds that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, the founders of Israel, who lived long before Moses. Because God does not say that he was their God, but rather that he is their God, inferring that they are somehow still in a state in which they can acknowledge and still worship their God and Creator. This is one of the main scriptures that people use to support the argument that God is outside of time, present and existing in the past, the future, and now simultaneously. That heaven is not just eternal, but that heaven is outside of the bounds of time completely. Now, this week on Wednesday, many of us celebrated All Hallows Eve, the day before All Saints' Day on the church calendar, as we just told the children about. And this week, the mourning of the 11 who died this past Saturday at the shootings of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. I found myself wondering if modern Jews still have differing beliefs about heaven. And Dr. Amy Jill Levine wrote about this very thing. She writes, I was by my mother's bedside in the local hospital. She was about 80, and her body was failing. Late in the evening, she woke from her sleep, opened her eyes, and she asked me, what will happen to me when I die? I immediately answered her, you'll see Daddy. My father had died decades earlier. She replied, I look like hell. Well, Mom, you've looked better, but when you see Daddy, you'll look as beautiful as you looked the day you got married. How do you know this? Mom, I've got a PhD in religion. I know these things. She smiled and I began to cry. My husband took my place by my mother's bedside and held her hand as she died. Afterward, my husband looked at me and said something to the effect of, I've never heard you say anything like that before. I didn't think you believed in an afterlife. But I told him that when I was talking to my mom, somehow I believed every word. It is often difficult to describe something you have not personally experienced. We find ourselves limited to analogies and parables in order to try to gain more understanding of it. Describing what it will be like in heaven also falls into the same category. C.S. Lewis was a master of analogy. In his Narnia book series, he describes heaven when the characters die in a battle and then they are shoved through a stable door. There, instead of finding themselves in a dark, dim, and crowded stable as they expected, they discover they're in a beautiful field of green grass, blue skies, and lovely fruit trees. The fruit that grew on the trees was delicious beyond description. It was so delectable that once you had eaten it, the best thing you had eaten before now seemed completely dull and tasteless. The characters in the Narnia book noticed a sense of lightness about them. One character described it as being unstiffened. They described heaven as they stopped feeling old. In conclusion, our passage today gives us two important things to remember. The first is that our God is our God of both the living and the dead. Our life here on earth is not the only life we will live, but it is in fact simply a dress rehearsal for the life that we will live for all eternity, outside the bounds of time, in heaven. My friends, this is indeed good news, that the pain we have in our bodies that we wear out here on earth, that pain will not follow us forever. It will end, and eventually we will be unstiffened and young again and at peace. And secondly, our life in heaven, we will know God and love God. We will simply belong to God and to ourselves, and all the human created concepts of ownership and property and hierarchy, that will no longer apply. Slaves will be free from their masters. Poor will be equal to the rich. Our broken hearts and our broken bodies will be healed. And as saints, we will all at last be whole, at one with God and each other and the universe, just as God intended us all to be. Thanks be to God. Amen.